Still hope you enjoyed it. We're continuing with an innovative and comprehensive framework for social vulnerability assessment. Please welcome Enrico Frumento and Roberto Puricelli.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Well, what we are talking about is essentially a new methodology we developed and applied in different situations to perform what we call the social-driven vulnerabilities assessment. That is a new type, let's say, of assessments which is meant to assess the vulnerability of enterprises against social engineering attacks, or at least modern social engineering attacks. This is we, Enrico and myself, and Roberto, my colleague, which will do a part of the presentation as well. First of all, a little bit of what is Chefriel, just to understand where we are coming from and why we are worrying so much of the enterprises. Because Chefriel is an innovation center, which is a spin-off of the Polytechnic of Milan, and the mission is essentially to bridge between the research academic world, which is mostly not too much tied to the market needs, and on the other side, the companies which are more developing their new ideas for the market, and so less long-term research. Our role is just gapping these two worlds and having a foot in the research field and at the same time in the companies. We are more or less 500 people, 20 of which are working in the security areas. What you will get from this presentation? We are going to see essentially what is, in our opinion, social engineering today, especially the social engineering 2.0. This is how we call it, because it is made of several trends and several things which are coming out from the cybercrime. What is cybercrime today, effectively? Then we're going to argue about how the companies can react to this type of threats, and which are the real vulnerabilities of these companies, and how they can react or measure or assess this type of vulnerabilities. And we will also show you some real numbers. We did this type of assessments for several enterprises and about 12,000 people. So we will share with you a lot of fun, hopefully, but for the beers you will have to wait this dinner this evening. So just to frame the problem, what is cybercrime today, at least what is the type of threats that are used by cybercrime in order to better use the most modern social engineering tactics. First of all, if I would say what is cybercrime today, I would resume is with using this picture, from JIC-driven to business-driven approaches. That is, essentially, this comes out with a consequence that is selling. I mean, what the cybercriminal needs to sell cybercriminal products, let's say, who is the customer of these sellers? This is not a tricky question because involves directly, which is the evolution of social engineering nowadays. And of course, if I would say what is a cybercriminal today, at least not the JIC cybercriminal, I mean the high level, the one that understands which are the strategies of cybercrime and define the, let's say, the strategy of a whole attack. Then I would say that cybercriminals are more or less like door-to-door sellers because they share the same approach. That is this, both tries to enter a system or the door, tweaking the person at the door. This is the real essence of social engineering after all, and this is proven by the facts because as you know, most of the recent threads heavily use social engineering tactics, and these, as we will see, impacted a lot of other related technologies, like for example the malware infection strategies. So anything new? This is a question because since few years, well, a lot of years, there has been talks in DeepSec and in all the other conferences talking about security, social engineering, and therefore what is changing nowadays to come back and talk again about this thread, not only about the possibility to assess this vulnerability, but also what has changed in the approach of this attacking technology. There are a lot of things new. A totally different approach, which use the same techniques coming from marketing. For example, viral marketing, guerrilla marketing, unconventional marketing. All these things are shaping deeply what is nowadays the social engineering 2.0, which is made of different things, I would say. First of all, just to let you understand what I'm telling. If I put the user at the center, I have different roles which are playing together to sell something to the user. There's the seller, the marketing experts, the social network influencer. All of them are trying to fulfill their advertisement, to sell something to the user. Well, they use several techniques, like, for example, sentiment analysis, social networking, scanning, methods for understanding the real, let's say, desires of the user. The same thing could happen, or actually happens, for different type of advertising. And therefore we have, let's say, the dark side of the sellers, the dark side of the marketing experts, the dark side of the social network influencers, which is not shown but is written below. And we have also another set of roles, which is really important. You can think about the role of psychologists, human-computer interaction experts, sociologists, developers, and not only. Because the modern, let's say, social engineering-based threads are well designed, and not only in terms of tweaking the user, but also in terms of being usable by the user, being nice. They have to be sold properly to the user in order to tweak him. And therefore, this is the reason why we have in our team, and we are developing our own methodology to assess this type of vulnerability, including a lot of different roles. For example, in our team, we have a malware expert, web designer, developer, a psychologist, an expert of human-computer interaction, a marketing expert, social network influencer, a legal advisor, because as we will see, legal issues are very, very important in this situation. So it is a complex team, which is more or less the same type of teams we have on the other side, on the cyber criminal side. But most of all, then, we have to define what is social engineering 2.0, at least what we think is. Well, this is a classic security triangle, so we are still hanging on the left side, on your left side of the triangle, hanging between the human and the social triangle corners. But just putting together all the elements, we could summarize these 7 big issues. So the malware, I will go through them quite briefly, so I will not read in the slides each of them. So first of all is the malware ecosystem 2.0. Social engineering already changed a lot the ways in which malware infects the systems. First of all, a one of the most evident issues is that you don't still have to infect the system and escalate the privileges, because you are already going to infect the system of the user that has the asset you want to steal. And therefore, there's no need to escalate the privileges or becoming root, because it is enough for you to infect in the user land, because the user is already a user that you have selected using the techniques that we will argue in a moment. The other part is the automatic social engineering attacks. Automation of the social engineering through the information collection and mining. This is a part that involves a lot let's say, in general, the social tagging, so not only the social network, the social tagging networks in general. And involves also the sentiment analysis of not only on the social networks, but also on small groups, because the sentiment analysis technologies have evolved a lot and can be nowadays applied to even little groups. This is a perfect example that describes the contamination of the social engineering from the market techniques, because these sentiment analyses are coming directly from marketing techniques. The other point is the abuse of linked open data. You know, the web of data is the essence of the coming Web 3.0, and abusing all this data is an important issue that helps to contextualize the attack you are going to perform against the selected targets. And therefore, it is really important to contextualize having this data. Another important trend is the diffusion of use of chatbots. Chatbots were left a few years ago with a quite limited type of interaction with humans, which were often discovering that they were chatting with a chatbot and not with a real user. Nowadays, instead, this is somehow helped by the shortened messages exchanged, for example, through Twitter. And in several cases, the lack of real social engineering is somehow compensated by the use of these automation tools. Another important thing is about the use of magnetics, personality profiling models, but most of all of the cognitive psychologists. In 2010, we presented a paper here at DeepSec in which we demonstrated how creating a properly crafted phishing made using psychology, cognitive psychology models. Well, we presented a paper in which the results were pumped up by just tweaking with a correct theory behind the users. So cognitive science are very, very important in the evolution of this type of threats. The other one is the massive use of emails compared to other attack vectors, like, for example, phone calls, physical presence, and other things like that, because it simply doesn't need talented hackers. You know, being able to trick a person physically being present in front of the victim is quite difficult, much more simpler to use mails. And this is what we are going to use as a vulnerability assessment methodology. And then the last one is probably the most important, because social engineering, even if a few years ago at the times of Mitnick was probably used for fun, nowadays just an economic tool for making money. So there is no other aim for using social engineering nowadays than making money. If I would summarize the real essence, therefore, I would say that it is in these two opposite concepts: abuse versus use. I would give you an example, just two examples actually. The abuse of psychological and cognitive science models. They are used by marketing experts for profiling users. They are used for profiling new forms of sociology, the so-called cyber sociology, and then they can also be abused at the same time for trying to trick the user and selling other type of goods. And at the same time, the abuse of social networks, but not only, also the abuse of linked open data, as I said before. So, as I said, the last point was that social engineering is an economic instrument nowadays, mostly. And it is almost used in its most advanced version, at least, in what we call the advanced persistent threat. But, well, you already know what more or less are. But I would just recall briefly an example, just to give a common ground to anyone. That is the RSA situation in which the attack was advanced, but not advanced in terms of technological advancement, because the malware involved was an open source modified malware. The mail was just few lines. There was just 0 day inside the attachment, but this was just probably the most advanced part of the attack. It was advanced because it involved a lot of operation before the real attack, which was based on socially engineering the victims. Was persistent because it lasted for a long time. RSA suffered from they even don't know how much data they lost from due to this attack. And it was a threat because after all, at the end there was an exfiltration. A few weeks ago, the situation evolved, and we now have this attack, which is called dark hotel attack, which lasted for more than 7 years. Essentially, they infected several networks of the most known hotels, involving a sort of drive-by download attack in which the people connected to the Wi-Fi of the hotel were asked to install an update of Java. I don't go in detail of the attack, but it's just to mention that this trend is going on. What these two apparently different attacks have in common is the use of social engineering at the beginning. Because this attack involved a lot of messages properly crafted and properly prepared to tweak, not the system, but the user, in a smart way. So, an APT has its central role in social engineering, as we said. But there are other parts. For example, first of all, the target selection. The targets have to be properly selected. So, as I said, we are going to attack only the users that we already know owns the asset we want to steal. And this is done using OSINT operation on the social networks scanning, social network, but not only social network. Let's say in general on the social tagging systems. Following, there is the part of a ad hoc technological attack. Ad hoc because it is built just after the selection of the victims. So it cannot be generic enough, have to be properly crafted around the desires, the profiles, the mood, the community that we selected that is going to be attacked. So it is ad hoc by nature. Then there is, as usual, the attack expansion, let's say the lateral movements of the created malware. And of course, at the end, the data exfiltration, which is just to bring out the asset that we selected. So the problem, by the point of view of the enterprise, is essentially this. How can we measure this risk? What practically an enterprise can do to define the weakness of this attack chain? And I give the word to Roberto.
Okay, so like here it comes our framework that, as I told in the title of the talk, is social driven. So what we try to do is to put the users in the middle of the framework, and also with the purpose of try to measure the level of risk inside the company. That's why we call it a vulnerability assessment. What we try to do is to start for the model of an APT that we just presented now, and select what, in our opinion, are the most interesting phases that allow us to simulate a potential attack against the company, and try to also to measure the performance of the attack in terms of risks. So what we did, we select the very beginning of the attack, and we do phase passive social information mining. Then we go in the middle, the curve of the attack with a spear phishing simulation attack. And then with the technological consequences of the attack, that is actually a technological attack simulation. Of course, this in terms of vulnerability assessment framework is not enough because it's just an attempt to simulate a possible attack. So what we did is add a prior phase for setup the objectives and to allow to go through all the other steps. And finally, of course, we focus also on countermeasures. That is one of the focus points of the assessment. And typically, since we are speaking about the human factor, we talk about awareness. So now we go to in detail to all the single phases to describe how we try to approach this kind of vulnerability assessment. The setup phases is usually something that is common in all kinds of vulnerability assessment because it has the purpose of share the objectives with all the stakeholders and define the boundaries of the constraints of the assessment. Usually, when traditional vulnerability assessment, this is done only with the security department or IT because the target of the assessment is the IT. Here, since we are talking about the target of the assessment is the human factor, so it's people, we need to involve also other departments. First of all is the HR department that provide all the information about the company and do the link between the employees and also with the legal part that is included in the contracts with the company. And sometimes we need also to involve people from innovation and communication due to the kind of argument or approach we are using. So where is the point when we are trying to assess the human factor? When an attacker tries to do a cyber attack against the human, doesn't care about the consequences of what happened later to the person he tried to tweak. But in our point of view, since we are doing just a vulnerability assessment, we need to take care first from the ethical point of view. That means to try to perform action that don't break the trust relation that there is between the company and all the employees. But also we need to do something more. That is taking into consideration all the legal requirements due to the contracts that relate to the company and the employee. And this is particular interesting topic in Europe that is different between the US legal framework. In Europe, particularly also in Italy, there are stricter requirements, so we need to put a lot of constraints in order to avoid to have a problem with this kind of framework. So what we put as a constraints in our kind of assessment. First of all, we in the very beginning phases, we look only for public sources. So we look for information that is publicly available on the web and that everybody can see. This has two consequences. That we don't go actively in contact with the user, so we do only passive social information mining. And also that we try to focus only on the company information. This is because we don't want to enter in the personal sphere of the people, but just to stay in the company level that is the target of the assessment. Then from the result sides, what we try to do is just to take aggregate and anonymous results. This is because management will usually take the result of this kind of assessment, don't have to take these results as something to take action against who fell in the assessment, but it's more for understand what is the level of risk of the company. Then the first phase is, as I told before, is the passive social information mining that has the aim of demonstrate the feasibility of a possible contextualized social engineering attack. As we told before, is focused on the company. So what we usually try to do is to analyze public sources such as social network, search engine, or their websites in order to try to retrieve information about user and more related to the company in order to profile some different kind of information that can allow to create an attack. And why is this working usually? This is because actually social network changed the way how we share information on the web. And a lot of people is usually careless about what is doing. So they just share a lot of information and they don't care about where they are sharing and how they are sharing. So sometimes there are a lot of information publicly available on the web. So when we try to do this kind of activity, we are in front of a huge volume of different kind of information. And what we try to select. First of all, we need some context that could be the possible target of the assessment. And this in our way, since we are trying to do a spear phishing simulation attack, it refers to emails. What we are doing usually is to retrieve from different sources a lot of directly or inferred email address that can be used then for the assessment. Then, of course, we can retrieve some potential interesting initiatives or argument that can be used to craft an email that is contextualized to the interest of the people we selected before. Usually we do this through social graph or like analyzing the public group on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and retrieve what are the most trend topic in them. Also, we look for templates in order to create also an email that is attractive from a look and feel point of view. And these two types of information usually allow us to create a really contextualized email that can be used during the assessment. Finally, when we do activity like this, we look also for some single evidence that highlight some specific risks. These are usually sometimes pictures for people that take a picture of the workplace and sometimes include some badges or documents or posted with password, etc. This actually is not, all this kind of information are not so much new because a lot of studies there are in this kind of fields. What we try to do in our approach is to automatize the most part of this operation, building a tool set, combining a lot of different open source and closed source tool together. Then we go to the core part of the assessment, that is the spear phishing simulation attack, that of course has the purpose to test the user behavior when they're stimulated with a social engineering attack. So how we do this? We just sent the email we crafted to a subset of the employee that usually is not the one we found before, but is the one that is provided from the HR of the company. And the kind of risk we try to evaluate is in two different ways. The first is how many people click on the link inside the email, exposing themselves to a drive-by infection attack. And then the second one is to track how many users also provide the credential. The credential actually is just an example of the typical company asset that should be kept private to the employee. To better understand what we mean about a spear phishing simulation attack, we give you an example of a possible email. So what we do is select an attractive argument that sometimes is a promotion or discount on holidays, food, or whatever. We add the request for the company asset, that is the credential usually. We add some contextualization to the company, that is the company name and colors or other template. And finally, we add the logo. Of course, this kind of email is associated to a website that contain all the elements that refer to the email, and also a login form where the company asset is requested. Of course, in order to avoid that people think that that one is a real email, we add some little inconsistency in both email and website in order that is possible to recognize that it is actually phishing. Technically, what we do is just to track the behavior of the user, and we develop a tool that is able to correlate the information with the sample data, and then provide a final report with all the aggregated statistics. Actually, what we are doing also for the website is not just to track the number of clicks, but also do a fingerprint of the system, like retrieving all the information about the configuration of the machine, that is the operating system, the browser version, or the plugin. What we usually find in this kind of activity is that people often have a potentially dangerous behavior from the social part of the assessment. And for the technical part, we highlight that a lot of, the most part of the workstation, the PC we analyze, have obsolete or unpatched software that allow us to create a possible sequence attack. Then we have actually this phase that is to simulate this possible attack, and usually we do this through a proof of concept that is based on information we retrieved before. And what we do is just combine this information with the publicly available information about vulnerabilities or exploits, and we usually find a way to compromise the system. Then we add some other more advanced techniques usually to do this also inside of the company in order to bypass all the possible countermeasures that are taken inside the company. Finally, of course, we talk about the countermeasure. That is usually the awareness in two points of view. The first is the management that need to be aware of this kind of risk. They usually companies don't know about how much is relevant this kind of risk. And then also the employees that need to know how to protect themselves. For this, the last part, the huge problem that we faced in is that usually training is something that is not effective. So what we try to do is like to propose some innovative way to do this, like through video appeals that represent visually also some behaviors or trend that people should follow, and also with the gamification, that is something that stimulates more the user, and it's useful to let people to better understand and remind also all these kind of threats. Okay, this complete the part of this kind of assessment, and now we go through in some of our results. We want to share with you this because actually we had a lot of experience on this topic in the last 5 years, and we perform a lot of different vulnerability assessment of this kind in a lot of big companies also, and we have a huge number also of users. So I would like to ask you a simple question, if you want. Given an example that we showed before the positive email, would you click on the link and insert your company credential? Maybe not, actually. But what we got in our results is that given all the people who was target of the assessment, the 34% of people in average click on the link, that is 1 on 3 people. And also the 21% inserted the credential, that is 1 on 5 people. So, to show you better how is the distribution of this kind of assessment, we show you some of them in this chart that compare the two kind of tests we did. As you can see, all the circle represent one vulnerability assessment, and the dimension is the qualitative dimension of the company, and the color is the business sector. So what we can get on all this, of course, after the the average I just presented before, is that only 3 emails usually, if they are really contextualizer, are enough to obtain 1 click on a potentially malicious website. Only 5 emails also are valid, are enough to obtain a valid credential that allow to access to the company systems. And if you analyze the trend, it's also interesting to see that almost the 60% of conversation rate from people who click and then also insert the credential. Another, comparing this kind of results with other taken from other studies is also really interesting. Given the average success of traditional phishing in less than 1%, if we have some different kind of statistics. The average click rate in marketing email is around 2%. The average click rate in modern phishing, we took these numbers from some different studies, and we have also the reference, if you want. Is 10%. But what we got is that in company, if you contextualize really the email to the single company, the success rate is 34%. That is a quite impressive number. Then it's also really interesting to analyze the time of the attack. So once again, every line is one assessment, and we see the time compared to the success rate in a percentage, because we need to compare all the different kind of assessment. What we get is that in the most part of the case, we have an high effectiveness in the first minutes. So a lot of people has an impulsive reaction when they receive a spear phishing email. And speaking about numbers, after 10 minutes, it's already the 41% of success. And after 20 minutes, it's the 50% of success. It's also interesting to track what are the user reaction about this when people receive emails. So what we try to do is to profile the different kind of people that see the email and signal this to somebody inside the company. We profile 3 different kind of typical users. There is the first, who is the full person. That is the one who believe in the argument of the spear phishing, and so ask information about the discount, usually. Then we have the second part, that is the guilty. That is the person who insert the credential because he is attracted from the discount, but then realize that something is wrong, so signal to somebody that there is a possible phishing. And then we have the good. That is the person who recognize immediately that the mail is actually phishing and signal it to the ATO or the security department. So we focus on this last profile of person, and it's really interesting to understand how many people do a signal like this, and also after how much time. So we got that in average, it's only 1% of the employees do a signal like this, and the fastest one in after 6 minutes. Then sometimes this kind of communication go through an internal process and arrive to the technological countermeasure to this. So, like people inside the company block the access to the website, to the phishing website after 20 minutes. That is the fastest time we track. If we compare once again this information with the chart we showed before, we see that after 6 minutes, we have already the 32% of success. And this is interesting because this time is also taken from other studies. Is the time that usually a typical real attack is active in time before the attacker stop it. But also for the kind of the attacker, the second time is more interesting because it's the time where the company is able to actually react to this kind of threat. Then finally, what we try to do is to characterize also the users that fell into the text. So insert the credential in the website. And we do this from different kind of characteristics. First is age. And when we do this, what we see is that usually younger people is more exposed to this kind of attacks. Then we do this also with the role inside the company, and it's actually interesting to see that the increasing is the role, the more aware is the person about this kind of threat. But what we notice a lot of time is that also managers are vulnerable. So this kind of risk is not enough known like inside the company. Finally, we track also something relating to people who attend specific courses on phishing. And what we got is that actually it seems that the training and awareness is a first step in the risk mitigation. Then we arrive at the conclusion, and I let Enrico to do this.
Okay. So what? The conclusion about what we saw. There are very important numbers behind this type of assessments, and therefore what we are wondering is why this is happening, more or less. Well, it is in the human nature, but essentially it is for these reasons, because people do not know that sharing information on the social media can be dangerous, especially when they are mixing private and working lives together. And at the same time, there is another problem, because companies are exposed to social-driven risks and are not able to regulate the behavior of users in what is felt, in what is belonging to the private life of users. The use of social networks is belonging to the private life, and therefore it is very difficult to regulate the access to this type of media. But most of all, in companies, what we found is that often they do not even have the perception of how much this threat is big, because more often we find a lot of let's say illegal uses of the brand by the employees, of which the company and the communication is not aware, a lot of media which could have been found by the company security department, also doing a simple research on the social network. So they are not aware at all of this type of threat. And therefore, a lot of employees could become a risk for the enterprise just for a slice of cake. For example, I would love a slice of this type of cakes. And therefore, we come to the conclusion.
So thank you very much for
Thank
your
you very much.
attention.
If there is
a question,
a question, you're welcome.
We have a few minutes left for 2 or 3 short questions. Okay.
Congratulations to your presentation. It was really very impressive. I'm CEO of an energy company, and we actually plan to do these tests, and I expect the same, let's say, catastrophic number we have seen. And my question is, what are the follow-up with the company after doing such an experiment? How can we improve that next time it will be better?
Okay. We also had the chance to perform the same type of vulnerability assessment in the same company twice, at the beginning and after a training assessment. What we are trying to do is to find new ways of awareness, which are not the usual, let's say, methods, and so involving gamification, games with a purpose, and also new and interactive, let's say, type of awareness methodologies, which are different compared to the target of your awareness. Because, for example, one method that works often is for small groups, for example, managers, is to find before the lesson the information they are exposing on the net and present those information anonymized before the lesson, so to keep their attention immediately. For bigger groups, it's still an open problem. Actually, it is, I would say, the open, let's say, open nerve of security is how to effectively train the user and how long this training lasts. Is a matter of research, and we are going to do research on this as well.
One more question?
Hi. You data showed that the training, it reduced the answer rate from 24 to 19%. Is that right? That those people who had awareness training were less likely to respond?
Yes, that statistics was like, because usually we do this kind of statistic based on information that we get from the HR of the company. Okay, so when we have this information about people who attend specific courses about phishing, we try also to distinguish on these two kind of groups. And usually when we do this analysis post this activity, we see that actually something is working, but it's not a real huge gap. So what we would like to expect is that when people is trained correctly, then that percentage really reduce for a lot, like said, 10% or 2% maybe. What we would like to see this, but it is not statistic about concerning our new innovative way of training.
So this was other awareness training done by someone else? Yeah.
Yes, is the training that the company usually do. So this information is already retrieved from the HR that know that some people attend this kind of courses. So they tell us that they attend this kind of courses, but as you see, is a bit effective, but not so much to reduce a lot the percentage.
Yeah, because the trainings actually running on the companies are somehow quite traditional. Rooms with a teacher, and probably in some cases posters, but not much. Very traditional ways of teaching people.
Okay. Thank you very much, Enrico and Roberto. We'll quickly advance to the next talk about TLS implementation and side channel attacks. If you want to stay, that's fine. If you want to switch to the other room, please do so quickly and silently. And we'll continue in a minute.